Great to see everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with Andrea DeMatteo. She's an account executive and underwriter with MLB Mortgage. MLB is a preferred lender with NEXA, and renovation loans are a major focus for their team. We recently worked with a couple that wanted to purchase a home in a specific neighborhood and school district. However, most of the homes available had already been purchased by investors, renovated, and they were outside of their price range. But they did end up finding a home. It did need both cosmetic and structural work. They purchased it with a 203K renovation loan, put about $43,000 worth of renovations into it, but they were able to customize it and get it to be exactly like they wanted it. When the final appraisal came through, it appraised for $41,000 more than the purchase and renovation costs. So they were able to walk into instant equity. It really worked out well for them. Also, if you have any listings of homes that need work, you can market it by pairing it with a renovation loan. And that way you can shift the buyer's focus to what the home can become. These loans are incredibly powerful for turning maybes into yeses, but they're also probably one of the more underutilized loans out there. I believe the big reason for that is that most realtors really don't have a good understanding of how they work, which makes it harder for them to confidently recommend them to their buyers. So that's exactly why I wanted to connect you all with Andrea today, so you can get a clear, practical understanding of renovation loans. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Andrea so she can walk you through how these loans work, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards. Andrea?
Thank you, Steve. Good morning, or afternoon, everybody. I'm not sure where you are. Well, what am I talking about? Everybody's on the either East Coast or West Coast, so it's definitely not afternoon. So today we're going to present the 203K. So the first thing I want to just talk about is a concierge desk. It's really important. MLB has one, but other lenders, not every lender, but there are some other lenders out there that have them. And the concierge desk takes on a lot of the legwork. So I do know from a broker and a realtor standpoint, a lot of people kind of veer away from these because of the extra layer to the file. You already have your appraisal that you have to wait on, you have your title that you have to wait on, and now if you do renovation, a lot of people are like, oh boy, now we're waiting on a contractor and all that stuff. But outside of getting the contractor bid, when you encounter a lender with a renovation desk like MLB and other lenders out there, we handle the rest of that. We vet out the contractor. We get all the paperwork from the borrower. We get all the contractor documentation that's needed. So it cuts out that stress for someone like Steve, and of course you on the other end waiting to get that loan done. It happens simultaneously with the rest of the loan when the appraisal is getting done and all that stuff. So it really doesn't add any time to loans. So when people ask me how long does it take for a renovation loan to close, my answer is no different than a standard FHA loan, which is anywhere from 21 to 28 days. That's, from start to finish. 21 to 28 days is going to be your standard FHA with or without a renovation. So the renovation piece doesn't really add time to it. The only thing that could add time to renovation is the responsiveness of the contractor, right? Because now there's another third party that we're working with. We have to wait on that person to get us the paperwork. So in this PowerPoint, even though we handle all of that work, Steve, there is a list of documentation that we are going to ask for. Any lender is going to ask for of that contractor. So if you want to kind of get a head start by giving that to your borrower or reaching out to the contractor and getting that paperwork, that will alleviate any additional time frame of waiting on the contractor to respond to us. So that really is the only thing you'd have to worry about, but it's not that common. So what is a 203K? It back in the 70s when they came out with this, it really was to do some minor repairs to meet HUD guidelines. And then as it kind of morphed into what it is today, you can legitimately take a house, knock it down to the foundation, as long as you leave the foundation, and rebuild a whole house. So you can do anything. It started as just minor cosmetics to major repairs to now you can knock a house down and build a whole new house. And we do see people do that. We see people do that in areas where they want to buy, but the house is, I wouldn't say dilapidated, but not in great condition, but it's a great school district. They have family that lives there. So they'll just say, just tear the house down and build a whole new one for me the way I want it. We have people that do gut rehabs with the renovation, and then we have people that do minor stuff like just a roof repair, or maybe just upgrading their kitchen. So there's a wide array of different things you can do with the renovation. The 203K is, as you probably are all concerned with, for purchases. And then Steve, of course, for rate and term refi only. There's no cash out option for any renovation product, which, by the way, I'm presenting 203K, which is the FHA product. There is a VA renovation product, and there's a Fannie Mae renovation product. They're all the same. They're for purchases or rate and term only. None of them allow for additional cash for debt consolidation or anything like that you can't do. And now with 203K, which separates itself from all other renovation loans out there, they have two different kinds of renovation. They have a limited and they have a standard. And we're going to go into the two different ones that they do offer. And this slide's just really more information. These are 8 reasons why you would use a 203K, but this certainly doesn't cover everything. It covers from upgrading an aged home. We just did a renovation recently where the house was built in the early 1800s. So I don't know if anybody here is familiar with push button electric. It's very interesting. My brother had it. You would push a button to turn it on and push a button to turn off the electric. So they didn't want that. They wanted the regular flip a switch kind of thing and update everything in the box downstairs. So we just gutted the whole thing out and redid the entire electrical work of the home. So you can do anything. And by the way, FHA 203K is the one that is the most lenient in terms of the work you can do. Fannie Mae doesn't let you tear a house down. And VA has a lot of limitations. Matter of fact, VA renovation will mirror the limited 203K, which is the first one we're going to go into. So if you need a comparison, that's a good way to think of a VA. Of course, there's plenty of benefits with the 203K, making the home your own to upgrading items. One of my favorite is the neighborhood revitalization, because we do tend to see a few people doing renovations in the same neighborhood, which helps bring up those lower income neighborhoods. So that's if you have any, like if you kind of zero in as a realtor in specific areas, this is a great way to build up certain communities. Now, this one itty bitty slide is geared to MLB. Everything else is not. But this is MLB's overlay for FICO, which is minimum 580. Outside of New York, it's 580. If it's New York, it's 600. I will tell you, I've worked at some large box lenders like Remen, Loan Depot. They all had a 620 or a 600 minimum. So it's common to have that FICO overlay. But the rest of the loan is the same. And this is geared really towards you, Steve. A lot of questions we get are, what's the DTI? What's your LTV? Like what's the credit part of it? It's all the same. Nothing differs from your standard FHA loan to the renovation in terms of the credit file itself. So the credit's going to be evaluated the same. You can do a manual underwrite on a 203K. There's no restrictions on the type of home that you can do, as long as it's as long as it makes sense. Like I live in a log cabin. That doesn't make sense in the city, right? So as long as your house style makes sense and you can comp it out, it's no different on a renovation than on a standard FHA. And this kind of actually goes into that. The types of eligible properties, they're all eligible. They're all eligible as long as they're comped out. If I don't know how long everybody's been in the business, but I've been doing it for since 1998, so almost 30 years. And log homes used to be considered unique. And now there's so many out there in certain areas that you can't consider them unique anymore. As long as it could be comped out and log cabins are common for the area, they're no longer considered unique. Neither are barndemoniums or anything like that, because if there's plenty in the area and you can comp them out, you can use FHA financing, which means you can use the renovation product. It's not listed here, but you can use a renovation product on manufactured homes. I know there are certain pockets in Georgia and other states around in your area that have manufactured homes. So you can use this product for a manufactured home. Matter of fact, I literally just got a loan in the other day. It's a manufactured home and they want to build an ADU unit. And you can do that as long as it's attached to the home. It's a tricky transaction, but we can do it. This also just goes into, again, your loan amounts are no different than your standard FHA loans, just within county limit. You have your purchase of 96.5 LTV and your rate and term refi of 97.75. One thing to note is this little last bullet point here. So on refinances, it's tricky when people just want to do a roof on a renovation product. You're not getting a dollar for dollar value back for a roof. If you're paying $20,000, you're not going to see a $20,000 increase in your home. Just like if you gut out your electric and redo electric, you're not increasing value of a home. And HUD is aware of that. So for refinances, you can go up to 110% of the after improved value, which means that if you are doing items like the roof and electric work that don't give you a dollar for dollar back in value, you can actually go 110% of that appraised value. And very seldom have I seen work not be covered with that policy. So never, if you have any questions, any minor work, I shouldn't say major, any minor work and you're unsure of, just, Steve, you can always reach out to me and we can go over the repairs.
Andrea, with that, are you taking questions as we go, or you just kind of want us to hold to the end?
Yeah, I mean, I personally like to keep things less formal because if you see something right now, I say ask a question now. It's Steve, it's up to you. If you're okay with it, I'm okay with it.
Okay, so I'm wondering
I'm
about
fine with that.
Okay, the 110% LTV and whatnot. Should you do that? Does that change the occupancy requirement or anything? Because are they looking at it in terms of, hey, look, if I'm giving you 10% more than it's worth, you need to stay in the house X number of years. Is there anything wacky like that?
No,
Okay.
nothing like that. It's just that 110% is the value that's being determined to cover the repairs. It's not okay. Let's say your house is worth $100,000 and you owe 110,000. They're not looking at that saying, well, we're going to cover that. It's just determining whether or not the repair piece falls within that guideline. So of course, taking the repairs out, if somebody owes 80,000 on a $100,000 house, you're good. Now, if they want to do $30,000 of repairs, that's where that value comes in, where they'll allow you to go that high. I know what you're saying, because if you're over 100%, it's kind of risky where you're kind of eating into your equity and you're actually negative equity now, but there are no requirements where you have to stay a particular period of time now. So I'm going to go into the two different types of renovations now. So the first one's going to be limited, and you're going to hear me say the word a whole bunch of times because it really is a limited program. And then we have the standard. That other one is the one where you can do anything without restriction. So the limited, and these are all HUD guidelines. None of these are overlays. So on the limited part, you're capped at $75,000 of total repair costs. And what that means is all your repairs plus all the costs for the repairs. With renovations, you have post-closing inspections for each phase of the work. There's going to be an inspection that's done. So there's a cost for that. Some of the work you do may require permits. So there's a cost for that. There's something called a contingency reserve, which is going to be anywhere from 10 or 15%, which I'm going to go into what that is shortly. But that also, you have to factor all of that into that $75,000 cap. So with that being said, I say, and I've done the math 100 times, if your bid itself from the contractor is over 65, chances are you're going to go over $75,000. Now, it doesn't mean you can't do a renovation. It just means you're not under the limited program and you're going to be kicked into the standard program. And there's a few differences between the two. On one of the differences between the two is on a limited, you do not need a HUD consultant. So if you're within that 75 total repair cost, you don't need that extra party or step of getting a HUD consultant. So if your repair costs do go over 75, that's where you're going to have to get a HUD consultant. With the limited program, you're limited on the number of individual contractors you can use. You can only use 3 individual contractors. So now this is an overlay, but it's an industry-wide overlay. Most, if not all, lenders have a 3 individual contractor cap. I don't know why, to be honest with you, because we've made the exception and we've allowed more than 3 when it makes sense. I'm just going to use a kitchen upgrade as an example. You may have a flooring guy that's not a plumber. You may have a plumber that's not a painter, and you may have a painter who doesn't install cabinets. Well, that's 4 different people that you're going to have to hire to do all this work. In those instances, at least we would make that exception to allow a 4th contractor. But keep in mind, each individual contractor has to be vetted. We have to get the paperwork. And I said in the beginning, some contractors kind of take time getting us that paperwork. On the standard side, you'll see it's just one general contractor, and that's all we have to vet. On the limited side, each individual contractor has to be vetted out. So again, Steve, we talked about pre-planning. If you have a borrower interested in this type of thing, you can jump ahead and get a couple of things from the contractor. This way it saves time. There are two draws per contractor. So depending on the work, let's say you're doing some plumbing work, and you have to, let's say, take pipes out, which would be phase 1, and then replace the pipes phase 2. So each contractor has up to 2 phases of work that they can do. Because remember, this is a limited type of product. This is a product where plans are not required. No architectural plans are permitted. So this is nothing that's going to take years to finish. And it's nothing that should take too long for each contractor to need. For example, if you're doing a roof, that's one phase. The roof gets installed, the roofer gets paid, right? That's easy. That you don't need two phases for that. But if you're going to rip up some flooring and maybe blow a wall out, that would be phase one, removing all the debris and making sure that everything is done. And then you install things. So that would be phase two. So you can only do 2 draws, which equals 2 phases per contractor. And keep in mind, with the renovation product, the work begins after the loan closes, right? So you're not starting the work during the loan process. We don't want that, right? And quite frankly, the seller probably doesn't want that. And the buyer doesn't want to invest money in a property they don't own yet. So the work never starts until the home is purchased. And if it's a refi, same applies, but they already own the home. So with the limited 203K, you're limited on what you can do. You can't do any major structural work. Okay. So I mentioned about blowing a wall out. You can blow walls out. You can make rooms bigger, make them smaller. But if you're going to blow out a wall that's a load bearing wall, that's considered major structural work. And that's when it's going to kick you into the standard side. So we listed just about a dozen and a half of items here that are eligible repairs. They're not limited to this, but it just gives you an idea, an example on what you can do with the limited program. So you can do painting, electric work, HVAC, you could do your gutters, roofs, anything that's not considered major structural to the actual dwelling itself, it falls within the limited 203K. Of course, the ineligible repairs would be structural repairs, room additions, because that's considered major work, repairs that require architectural exhibits, which typically would be considered major work, landscaping and site amenity improvements, so anything away from the dwelling, and any repair that will displace the borrower for more than 30 days. You really shouldn't have too many like that because it's a limited program. Now, this slide actually is geared for this audience. So this is like a cheat sheet. When a buyer says, what can I expect on a renovation? This right here, and Steve, if you don't have it already, I'll give you the PowerPoint and please disperse it as you want. This right here is a great way to explain to a borrower in a nutshell what they would expect. It starts with them locating the property. Then they sign the contract, which is separate and apart. You don't have to note anything about this work in the contract because the seller doesn't care what the borrower intends to do with the property after they sell. Then once they sign the contract, at that point, typically the borrower's already working on kind of getting a bid. They've already seen the house. They like the house. They're talking to a contractor already. And it just goes through the steps of what they can expect. So I leave this in there for everybody to use as like a little cheat sheet. Any questions on the limited before I go to standard? Standard's my favorite. Out of all the renovation products, it's my favorite. So standard, there is no cap. There is no cap. You can borrow, we just did a renovation loan. The renovation part was $400,000. It was a $1.2 million house. They were adding a whole second level that is totally allowable. And there's no cap on how much you can borrow as long as your loan amount with the repair costs are within the county limits, right? So we still have to abide by the county limits when it comes to FHA specifically. VA is a different story, but FHA you do. Now let's use the most exaggerated example of knocking a house down, right? So someone's going to tear the house down and rebuild a whole house on top of that existing foundation. We're not going to expect the borrower to live on that foundation in a sleeping bag, right? They're going to have to get an Airbnb. Yeah, right, Ben? I love that. Not everybody laughs at that. I think that's so funny. Nobody ever laughs when I say that. They'll either have to get an Airbnb or a hotel, or if they're lucky enough, stay with family so they're not incurring a cost. But HUD's aware of the fact that they could incur a cost of a monthly housing payment. So the borrower can finance up to 12 months of their mortgage payment. So in that example of knocking a house down, yes, that's not going to be habitable for quite a bit. So they'll be able to finance 6, 7, 8, 9 months worth of mortgage payments. The HUD consultant will determine that, right? So when you're looking at knocking a house down and rebuilding it, I would say 9 months of that maybe would be uninhabitable. And then of course the cosmetic stuff, some of the house, then the house could be habitable at that point. And then the HUD consultant will tell us how many we can factor into the loan. If your house has 1 bathroom and you're redoing the bathroom and the 1 kitchen, that's not habitable. And depending on how long the work that may take, the HUD consultant could say, that won't be habitable for 1 or 2 months. We can, finance 1 or 2 months of mortgage payments. So the HUD consultant will determine how many months we can finance on mortgage payments. So they're not paying the mortgage. It's being financed into the loan. Unlike the limited, there is 1 general contractor. So if again, using the most exaggerated example of tearing a house down, you need multiple contractors and multiple different companies for demolition and all that kind of work. You're never going to keep that into 3 contractors. So one general contractor, that's all we vet, that's all we care about. And it's up to that contractor to hire the subcontractors needed to finish the work. And unlike on the limited side that has 2 draws, you have up to 5 draws on the standard. So you're going to get, using the house demolition of the house itself and removing the debris. That would be phase 1. The HUD consultant would come out, make sure debris is removed, give the thumbs up, check gets cut, and phase 2 commences, which would be building the shell of the house. Once the shell of the house is constructed, HUD consultant comes out. Now, I highly recommend the HUD consultant being used even on a limited, because they are there to oversee the project. If you're just having a roof done, you don't need a HUD consultant. But if you're doing some upgrades to the house on the limited side, and it's fairly major, I would recommend getting a HUD consultant, because they are there to really represent the buyer, to make sure the work's being done timely in a workmanship-like manner, that the contractor is sticking within the time frames. So, the standard has more protection than the limited does because of the HUD consultant. So you can use a HUD consultant on the limited side if they choose to. Now, on the standard side, I wouldn't even look at eligible repairs, because anything to do with the main dwelling, you can do anything from install an elevator to knocking the house down, right? So you can do anything to that home. We actually just had 2 renovations, which is ironic to get 1, but 2, where the borrowers had disabled children, and they needed certain sensory I can't remember exactly what they were called, but certain rooms had to be done specifically for the child, for their disability. So, we were able to do things like that. And actually really neat. They were very colorful and, for touch and sight. So, anything you can do to the main dwelling. But here's your ineligible repairs: luxury items. Installation of a pool, can't do that. You can fix an existing pool, though. That you can do. Installation of a gazebo, tennis court, or spa, you can't do that. You can fix them if they exist, though. So these are items that are typically not attached to the main dwelling. So the main dwelling itself, no limitation. Outside that dwelling, it's when you have the limitations of installing new ones, but you can fix them if they do exist. And just like Unlimited, here's your cheat sheet on steps that the borrower would expect during the process of a renovation loan, which you'll get when Steve sends you the PowerPoint. Now, typically, this is a 1-hour webinar, and I go into a whole other stuff that most of you are not going to care about. But I'm going to go into this one piece here, which is how to calculate the loan, because I want to go into the fees. I want to go into what I explained earlier about the limited and why your bid really can't exceed $65,000. So this is the piece. These other pages here go into the rest of what's called a max mortgage worksheet, but this is the very top part of it. And this shows you the other fees included that compile that $75,000. The biggest one is the financeable contingency reserve. That could be 10 or 15%. So if you're looking at a $70,000 bid and it's a 10% contingency, you're already over $75,000. Right. So if you're looking at a $65,000 bid, a 10% contingency, you're at about $72,000, and you have $3,000 wiggle room to cover the other title update fees, inspections, and all that. Now, the question is, how do you know if it's 10 or 15%? The contingency reserve is 10% when utilities are not being shut down, right? So if they're doing any plumbing work, electric work, HVAC, all of that requires you to shut down utilities, it's going to be 15%. And if your bid is $67,500 and you're doing some utilities, that's going to kick you right over the $75,000 mark once you add that 15% reserve. So be really cautious on that piece of, if you're going under a limited, like what Steve did, he said it was $41,000 of repairs, you're well within the $75,000. You don't have to worry about it. It's when they really want to maximize it and they get you up to that $65,000 mark is when you have to be cautious and you want to get a pen and paper out, or Steve, you specifically, just call me and I'll help you with it. So I'm going to skip these other pieces. This is really more underwriting related, so you don't need to know how to calculate the rest of it. This goes into the HUD consultants. And again, this is not required for a limited. It's only required on a standard, the HUD consultant. But I do recommend it. And they really do oversee the work. I actually had a HUD consultant save a borrower over $8,000 of labor costs, because it was a big job. It was a big job. And the consultant said the average hourly labor cost was kind of excessive on the bids. So the HUD consultant called the contractor. He agreed to knock like a few bucks per hour off his work, and it saved the borrower over $8,000. So they're there not just to oversee the work; they're really there to represent the borrower. Here's the HUD consultant fee. So when we're talking about a limited, you're looking at between $1,000 and $1,200 for a HUD consultant, and that is a financeable fee, by the way. So it's not something that they have to shell out right now. It is up to the HUD consultant, though. I will tell you, it's up to the HUD consultant. I've had HUD consultants ask for half up front and then finance the other half. I've had HUD consultants finance all of it. So, depending on the area, when you just go into the HUD.gov website and you put in the zip code, it can give you dozens, and you can just keep calling HUD consultants until you find one willing to finance them, because they're all certified by HUD.
I'm sorry, how much is that again to expect? $1,000 to $1,500 for the consultant?
So for a limited, like, because I had mentioned, it's not required for a limited, but since it tells you up here, up to 1,000 for repairs less or equal to 50,000, up to 1,200 for repairs between 50 and 85. So right here, right up here for limited, if you choose a HUD consultant. A HUD consultant's fee will never go over $2,000 though. So, if you're doing, a gut rehab, a tear down, something that's worth, you're doing $300,000 of repairs, it's never going to go over 2,000. The only time you might see it go over this is a chart. This is an actual fee schedule they're supposed to follow. The only time you might see it go over that is if they add miles. There are some really rural areas out there, like North Dakota. There's not even a HUD consultant in the state of North Dakota. So I had one where the HUD consultant had to drive 4.5 hours to the site, and he charged a $4,000 fee for that. And rightfully so. He drove 4 hours to get there, so he charged for it, for gas, tolls, whatever they pay up there. So as long as it's, suburban, not too rural like where I live, you'll find a HUD consultant. This is another cheat sheet. This is stuff we've already went over, but it gives you a little cheat sheet of, again, limited. You can't displace the homeowner more than 30 days. The final inspections conducted when all the funds are dispersed. That's on the limited, similar to the standard. The final inspections conducted when all the funds are dispersed. You have your 5 drawers plus final disbursement. So this is a little cheat sheet, really more for Steve. Steve, when talking to you, really is what this is for. This goes into the concierge desk. We already talked about that. And I'm going to skip this right here. And this right here, it's very minimal. It's not a lot of paperwork. This is what we ask of the contractors. This is just for informational purposes, because we're going to reach out and get this information from the contractor. But we ask for a proof of their business license and driver's license. Now, if you are in a state, county, or area that business license are not required, you let us know that, and we'll do that research. And as long as we validate that, then the business license piece, obviously, it falls off. We provide a contractor profile. So the contractor fills out the profile, of which he or she will provide their liability insurance information that we need, their policy number, all that stuff, and some references. That's really important. The references are very important, because we don't want to hire the handyman up the block who's helped you change some light bulbs to do a gut rehab. They need to show that they've done similar type jobs. Right. So if you're doing a roof, of course, a roofer, don't really have to vet them out. But if you're doing, like a kitchen, we want to make sure that the contractor doing that work is not going to, hurt the borrower by doing work that's less than workmanship like manner. And then, of course, they're W-9. So it's not a lot of stuff that we ask of the contractor. And then lastly, these are the disclosures that we send out to the borrower, contractor, and consultant if there is one. So again, for informational purposes only, you don't have to worry about this, but this is in case you want to prepare the borrower for what to expect. This is in addition to your state specific disclosures and anything that gets disclosed upon registration. And that is it. Any final questions on the 203K renovation?
I had one question. What if you're doing a limited and with all the fees, it turns out to be $80,000? Could you pay an extra $5,000 to get it under 75 and still use a limited, or once it goes over, it's over?
You mean pay the contractor? Like, who are you paying?
Contribute money, so it only,
Yeah,
so,
no, unfortunately.
So it's only 75 versus 80.
Yeah, that you can't do. What you can do is negotiate with the contractor. If the contractor is, actually, there is something I didn't share. So, and I don't know why it's not in this PowerPoint. And I always usually share it because I was a little off not going through those underwriter screens. But we can reimburse up to 50% of prepaid materials at closing. So let's use the kitchen as an example. Let's say the borrower loved these cabinets, prepaid, bought these cabinets and bought the flooring, and they paid $10,000 for that. And the loan is still going. They haven't closed yet. You give us the invoices for that $10,000 that they spent, and we'll reimburse up to $5,000 of that at closing. Now, it doesn't change the fact that in your example, Steve, it's over 80,000, it's over 75,000, but at least it gives some money back to the borrower. Sure. To maybe cover that HUD consultant fee that they'll have to pay on the standard side. Because that's really the only difference, is the HUD consultant fee that's required versus optional on the limited side. We've had people that legitimately wanted like gold trimmed doorknobs, and we're like, okay, now you're a little over the top. So now they had to change it, get this doorknob, get that cabinet knob. And like it would just be like dollars over that line. So they had to cut back a few things, and then they just bought them after the fact.
I got a quick question.
Sure.
If you were to go over that $75,000, is there more cost involved in going with the regular as opposed to the limited? Is the limited a better deal, so to speak?
Yeah, it's the HUD consultant fee, because on the limited side, that HUD consultant is not required. On the standard side, which is over 75 or major structural work, that's when the HUD consultant is required. Okay,
so that's the only difference in cost to the loan.
Yeah, so I'll go back to the Max Mortgage worksheet when I was just talking about these fees here, right? So this is for limited, and you see there's just inspection fee, title fees, permit fees, contingency, discount if you're charging any. If you go to the standard side, you'll see it looks a little different because you can finance mortgage payments. We talked about that, right? But there can also be a feasibility study to the architectural fees. These are things that wouldn't exist either way, right? They're not going to just suddenly exist on the standard because it's a standard, but you have that 203K consultant fee. This is the only one here that's different that you would have to pay. These other ones you don't have to pay unless they exist. So that truly is the only additional fee from one to the other. I'm not going to bore you with all these other things, trust me.
I wrote down a couple things. Just curious about like tax implications, because now the original house, you rebuild it, now the value is doubled. I'm assuming at the front end of this, when you were doing your normal valuations, calculations, DTI, all that kind of stuff is taken into effect on the potential taxes when you're getting back to DTI and whatnot. Does that make sense?
No, we're using what it is at this time. We can't assume that they're going to assess that house and reevaluate taxes. I mean, if you're doing a house tear down and rebuilding it, who's to say that house value is now going to be greater? So we don't base taxes on the after improved value, and that's what it's called. The appraisal comes in as an after improved value. Mm-hmm. So the appraisals are done as if the work is complete, and they value it as such. But that real estate tax is what it is today, and it's going to stay that way until the work is complete. So we're not going to hit real estate taxes that are in the future. We're going to hit them for taxes that they're currently paying now, or they're going to pay when they close, which is on the current state of the house.
Okay, and I guess at some point that's going to come up though, because tax man's going to be looking at this.
Oh yeah, it's very it's very possible.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, because I'm just wondering if because now $3,000 is your taxes. 2 years roll around and they kind of catch wind of, holy crap, you built a new house. Now that 3,000 goes to 6,000, your tax bill just doubled. Now the mortgage payment just doubled, or escrow doubled. And now does that push them out of affordability? I mean, it
could. It could. It really, honestly, Ben, it could, but you're not factoring in movement of market, right? So right now we're kind of, I don't know about, your areas, but we're seeing in many different areas and pockets where values are starting to readjust after COVID, right? So values are going downward in some areas. So you could redo your whole house. It could be valued at today as the after improved value. 2 years from now, when the tax assessor comes, it may not be more. It could be more, it could be less. So because we can't foresee that from a lending standpoint, we're just going to hit them for the taxes that they're paying when they close on that loan.
Okay. I mean, fair enough. It just, maybe I'm just getting too far into it, but in my head, I'm thinking of almost like the arms. You know how arms beat everybody up back in the day? I mean, obviously that's an exaggerated scenario, but you know what I'm saying?
Similar, because that happened to me actually. Yeah. So like my payment went up $400 or $500 just like that, right? So it totally happens. And when you're doing the loans, we do have certain disclosures that borrowers sign. Here's a great example in Texas. We do it in a couple other states, but Texas is a big state. When you have new construction, we can actually, we don't have to hit them for the full taxes at closing. So we can actually say, we know for the next year, you're paying just on land. So we can't do that. We can't hit them for just land, but we can do up to 60% of the estimated, taxes. And then we have the borrower sign something at closing stating that they acknowledge their taxes are going to be fully assessed in a year. So they're acknowledging on paper that they're acknowledging their taxes are going to go up, and and that's, from a lending standpoint, that's enough for us to say, okay, they're aware of it. It's not going to be a shock. It's not going to take them out of line. And we hope they prepare for that.
Yeah. And that's, I understand. I'm just,
Yeah.
setting them up for failure potentially, I guess.
Yeah.
But,
Just letting them know, though, it's good. It's good that you're coming up with these questions to let them know that, hey, this, if you're looking to do major work, this could potentially happen in another year or two. Absolutely.
And as far as, my next thing was like, who sets the value for all of this? I mean, is it the appraisal? Because up front, you're going to have to know what you're getting into, obviously. So, does the appraisal do it today and then an aftermarket value?
Yeah. So what happens is, back a while ago, they used to do an as is and then an after improved. They used to do both in the reports. Now they just do an after improved. So when Steve goes to order the appraisal report, he's going to provide the AMC with the bid, and he's going to order it as a renovation. So those two things are very important. Order it as a renovation, and you provide the bid. And then the appraiser evaluates that bid and then determines what the value will be based on the work that they're doing. So the actual value on the appraisal is called after improved value, and that value is as if the work has already been completed.
Have you ever seen where that kind of, okay, what's my question?
Very rare that it doesn't. Well, that's why I talk about the roof. Let's talk about roofs or redoing electric. That doesn't give you any value to a home, right? So if that's all your borrower is doing is roof repair or replacement, electric work and plumbing work, and they're spending $60,000, and then they expect to get $60,000 back on the appraisal, it's not, that's not going to happen. You don't see that too often because you can go to that 110%. So they can go 110%. It doesn't always cover it. There are times the borrower does have to come out of pocket, but I will tell you, it is not that common. It's not that common because a lot of people we'll say the limited for cosmetic stuff. And that stuff does tend to give you the value, like Steve's 203K. And then the major work, when you're doing gut rehabs, room additions, building up, changing it from a 1 unit to a 4 unit, these all bring value. So it all depends on what the borrower is looking to do.
And the concierge, just the people behind the scenes in this whole deal, in certain areas, do they have, is there a list of those vetted contractors? Can we go at it that way?
I get this question a lot, and it sucks, Ben, because we're not allowed as a lender to give out contract. Like we're not allowed to recommend a contractor or a consultant. So we have a list in terms of, okay, we don't have to vet them. No, we've already went through the legwork, right? But in turn, if Steve calls me and says, Andrea, I'm in this county, do you have any contractors you can recommend? We're not permitted to do that. So we have a list internally for, do we have to take the time to vet this guy out? We just vetted him out 3 months ago, versus can we give you recommendations? That we can't do as a lender.
All right, that's fair.
Steve might be able to rub my conscience a little bit. And if I can find one, maybe I would, but we're not supposed to.
Okay. Oh, can you
Good questions, Ben.
I'll just take up the whole darn time.
No, you're good.
So is there any, can you do more than one of these within, just like a VA loan, for example? Technically, you can have 2 VA loans at the same time as long as there's proximity, whatever the requirements. Can you do that for this kind of a deal? I don't know who would do that, but it just got me thinking.
Well, I mean, there is a multiple FHA guideline. There is a multiple FHA because FHA is primary homes only, right? So the guideline states that there's 4 different exceptions to the rule to have more than one FHA loan. One is you're relocating over 100 miles for work-related purposes. The other is if your dependents increase. So let's say one of your borrowers is currently pregnant. We know the baby's coming. So we know they're going to need more space. They live in a 1-bedroom apartment. They want to buy a home. They can do that. I'm sorry. They live in a 1-bedroom home, FHA finance, and they want to get another FHA. They can do that. Vacating a jointly owned residence. So that could be Ben, you and I, we own a home together and I'm leaving and I want to buy another FHA. I could do that because I'm vacating the home that you and I are living in. That's FHA finance. And the last one is if you are a non-occupying co-borrower on an existing FHA loan. So there are 4 instances you can have. I had a father who had 4 FHA loans because he co-signed for each one of his kids. You could do that. Mm-hmm.
And what about like for work related? I'm assuming like self-employed work for home doesn't qualify.
No, no, yeah, it would have to be like, well, unless the work, like, let's say they're a contractor. They're a contractor in terms of I contract for an oil company, or I contract for not a construction contractor, like their contract work, and it requires them to relocate to another location. Yes. But if they're like self-employed contractor, like they do work on homes and now they want to move from New York to California, that would not be considered relocation for work.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I live in Noonan, but then I wanted to buy a home in Lake Lanier. That's probably 100 miles. I wanted to buy a house in whatever, but I'm still licensed in Georgia and whatever. So I'm going down a rabbit hole, but just
that would be tough. Yes. I go down rabbit holes all the time, Ben. I'll see you there. Any other questions? I mean, of course, if anything does come about after the fact, and if Steve doesn't know the answer, he'll call me and he's going to give you this PowerPoint as well. So you'll get all that information that we went over tonight.
I have some other flyers
Steve,
that I'm going to provide too, and also the recording.
Okay. Yeah, Steve, yeah, because I have I have 1, maybe 2 listings that I would like to do some stuff. Like, just, so give me, I suppose a Steve branded, whatever the heck, co-branded thing. So I could link to somewhere, video, whatever the heck, so.
Yeah, I have some stuff.
All right, awesome.
Well, everyone, thank you for coming. And like I said, I'll follow up with some more information. And I'm, here to field any questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll get with Andrea and I'll get the answer for you.
Sounds good.
Okay. Appreciate all this time.
Yes, you too. Thank you, everyone.
Right.
I'll touch base with you shortly, Steve.
Bye-bye, Candace.